and welcome to the Open Book channel. My name is Oleander, your designated open book, and in today's video, it's finally time to talk about Audra Winter. If you've spent any time in the bookish space over the last months, you'll know who I'm talking about. The release of the book, The Age of Scorpius, has been the most controversial book series in, I don't know, maybe ever, considering that every new drama on the internet becomes exponentially larger with shareability. I have to admit, this situation has fascinated me. Frankly, I have spent an unhealthy amount of time consuming content on its development. The rundown of the situation is, an indie author named Audra Winter prematurely entered the Booktok spotlight. She sold thousands of pre-orders on her not-quite debut novel because people liked her marketing The Age of Scorpius as her passion project that she'd been working on for the last decade, and it's a young adult dystopia based on the Zodiac. In and of that description, there should have already been some, not necessarily red flags, but signs that this was a risky purchase, as it is with any unestablished indie author. If they don't have a catalog of work, you can't be sure what you're getting. Though this was not technically a debut, as Audra had published it once before many years ago, only to withdraw and work on it again for years, she doesn't have a body of work with which to set expectations. And keep in mind that Audra is young, 22, so saying that you've been working on something since you were 12 is not necessarily a guarantee in quality or flex. That said, upon receiving so many pre-orders, Audra flipped a switch in presentation. She started calling herself an entrepreneur, changing her distribution plans from the safeguard that most indie authors have in using print on demand, and investing in ordering print runs herself, and assuring people how much work had gone into the book. That she'd not only gone through half a decade of writing and revisions of this book, but that it had been seen by an established developmental and a copy editor. And when people got the book, they were more than a little disappointed. Given the persona and promises, many found it too difficult to read, unrefined, and a bit more like an early draft. This is only the first part of the story, though. Upon this, reception was not great, but mostly constructive. I personally don't believe that in the situation I've described so far, customers have any right to demand a refund. Although the quality they were promised didn't meet expectations, buying any overhyped product comes with a risk factor, whether it's a book or not. I have touched on the nuance of this in another video, though, because I definitely feel as though there's a middle ground. For Audra to have presented herself in such a professional manner and to have provided such a subpar product, I feel like that's damaging to customers' faith in the industry, but there is ultimately nothing to do about that in indie but to be disappointed. The story of Audra Winter's release escalated from that point for a variety of reasons. Firstly, people who were so disappointed in the presentation and release latched onto checking receipts and fixating on her hubris. Audra was clocked as having claimed to be a master of her craft, literally calculating the time that she'd spent writing as over 10,000 hours, which all of us who genuinely practice the craft of writing know that, in this case, if you're just rewriting the same story over and over again, you're not honing your craft so much as repeating the same mistakes over and over again. There was a lot of overpromising and underdelivering, whereas if Audra's presentation had remained humble as a debut, perhaps people would have been more forgiving. Secondly, though, in response to the release's criticism, several things transpired, all relating to Audra's reception of said criticism. There were undertones of Audra passing the blame onto hired freelancers, that her book's state was the result of what others had greenlit as a finished product, though many commentators have surmised that there's no way for any of us to know how much of any edits actually got accepted into the work. Audra made some half apologies as well, admitting that she'd been so swept up by the process of publishing and pre-sale that the quality of the story itself got neglected. And personally, I am a little sympathetic to that pressure, but many still have pointed out, and will be reflected upon further in point 3, it shows where Audra's priorities actually lie in the marketing and art and additional bits of publishing over providing a polished story, which is less excusable. The story should obviously never come second. The Goodreads reviews for The Age of Scorpius were frozen on the grounds that the book was supposedly being review bombed, although many entirely valid reviews from verified customers were also being taken down. Audra made the claim that her negative virality had been attributed to by one bad booktuber, as what spiraled the whole thing and sabotaged her book, which ended up being quite the exaggeration. And once again, people latched on to her seeming to shirk the responsibility of such an unfinished product. Though it is admittedly bad form to blame another creator for the reception when your product is objectively problematic, Audra feeling bombarded and dogpiled on was also kind of sympathetic. It's not expected that any of us are equipped to handle that as a debut. For ease's sake, I'm just going to call her a debut, and it was a lot, all at once. But thirdly, and most controversially, Audra made a lot of announcements as to how she was going to rectify the state of her release, with grand statements of employing a team of over a dozen artists. Not editors, artists. When everyone wanted reconciliation for how poorly the novel itself had been, Audra was talking about her process of getting on call with artists for hours every day, writing to what they'd drawn instead of the other way around. We all have different processes, but it was generally decided by the masses that this is not the way to fix a novel. Audra has said that she wants to take a multimedia approach, which is fine if you're making a graphic novel or the like, but what she really needed to do was genuine developmental and copy edits to fix a story that had already been received and people were disappointed with. Much like the marketing style and her commitment to a full control print run release, it was pretty clear that Audra's priority was not the execution of the story itself. Proposing that the re-release would be even more of a special edition and cost more money made already disgruntled readers understandably miffed, because that's not what anyone was asking for. The drama of the release of The Age of Scorpius and Audra Winter's response to it has so many facets. It's about a debut author who got swept into the spotlight when she was unprepared in her craft, and a disproportionate response by readers caused by that disappointment because of the sheer numbers that she happened to sell. It's about an author who received more sales than most of us will ever see, handling criticism poorly, but also, given the great boon of that pre-sales money, no restrictions, and a growing pressure to continue to respond, the internet has been given the opportunity to watch as she handles the fallout in increasingly questionable ways. Ravenously. This whole situation has evolved over time. At the start, I think a lot of the hate was founded in jealousy that Audra had reached a success that was undeserved. Then things shifted in classic internet fashion to tearing down someone who wouldn't properly take accountability. And finally, in the late stage drama, we're all just fascinated by the choices being made by Audra and her team, because that's the weirdest part about all this, that there is talk of a team, that Audra is doubling down into a project that has already imploded, and is turning it further into a spectacle, or rather, a case study of what not to do upon a botched debut release. Although the situation has been fixated on beyond reasonable scope, there's a lot of helpful discussions being had about online presentation, overpromising, expectations, tact, accountability, and how to conduct a business too. Part of what caused this to blow up so exponentially was the fact that Audra took a turn in her presentation to calling herself an entrepreneur, using team speak and generalizations, changing numbers and narratives just ever so slightly as to inspire mistrust, because that's what succeeds on TikTok. The language she was using, the presentation that she fell into. She sold the book and herself too well as something that she was not. And now we're getting to see the worst case scenario of such a fallout. Everybody thinks they want Booktok success, but babes, majority of us aren't ready. I've been dropping this warning in the articles I write on NovelPad for a while now when it comes to trope talk and the tropification caused by Booktok, that it's a double-edged sword. Because what happens when you make the algorithm work for you, but you were never supposed to be in it? Like is seen here with Audra, it could ruin your career. Which, technically I have no right to actually say, she's got her whole career ahead of her. Maybe she bounces back. But the point is that instead of a quiet release of a debut novel that wasn't quite ready, and she could have grown from, this is now what she's known for, and there's so much pressure on her. It's hard watching Audra take her presale order money and directing it into further expanding her universe and business, rushing and investing more while we're all actually praying that she'd pull back, focus in, and not take so many risks. It could be the comeback of the century, but it's also more of a risk now than ever. That boom in sales isn't likely to happen again with the faith of readers so shaken. She is by all means a known name in the bookish space now, but that isn't necessarily a good thing. The reason I've particularly been so fixated on this developing situation is because there's another aspect of Audra I haven't mentioned, in that she's neurodivergent. Although, objectively, she didn't handle things very well, I am deeply sympathetic to the pressure and exposure she's been under from this spotlight on the internet. Sure, I also feel a sense of, abrasion and ick seeing the narratives that Audra seems to keep changing, but I see where she might have felt the need to perform them. As Novico speculates, there may not be an intentional false presentation at play so much as Audra herself forming things in a way that makes sense to her. If the world of Guardian is a paracosm, as so helpfully explained by Jolie, there may be no way for Audra to step back or respond better, even to objectively choose a different route with the business, because there is no option in Audra's mind but to fully invest in the thing that means everything to her. This isn't just a major controversial publishing story. This is a lot of our nightmares. This is my nightmare. I am horrified by the prospect. What if you put your whole self into something and the world finds you lacking? I mean, it all boils down to the fear of being perceived, and Audra did put herself out there in the way that she did for this to have happened. But I don't think anyone can argue that the sheer amount of eyes on the situation was proportionate, which is hypocritical, considering I'm talking about it right now. But more than dissecting Audra's actual posts and language choice, I want to spread this as a cautionary tale. I know how enticing it seems to go viral, to earn money for your writing, to get some tangible payoff instead of continuously yelling into the void. But we shouldn't all actually want to be Booktok darlings. Audra fit herself into the image of one, and this is what happens. Even if she bounces back, her reputation has been irreparably damaged. If you think that's worth the risk, well, you're a risky bitch then, because I sure don't. Because if you overpromise, you can equally over-disappoint, if that makes sense. More than anything, I hope Audra does find constructive growth in this, and that for all of us looking in on the situation to realize the potential harm of virality, to stop coveting it and stop wanting it so much. The lesson of the story isn't necessarily to stay humble, but perhaps not to try and morph ourselves into fitting a mold that we do not belong to. A mold that we really shouldn't want to be in. As someone who writes nonfiction prose, I can look at the numbers for successful romance authors, and I can be jealous. But that doesn't change the fundamental truth that that is not my market. That does not exist for me. And being a Booktok darling, likewise, doesn't exist, shouldn't exist, for 99% of writers out there. It's okay to be a debut author that doesn't sell hundreds of copies. It's okay to be indie and not have the money for rounds of professional editors. It's okay to still be honing your craft. The greatest takeaway that I've had from Audra Winter's situation is that if we all weren't so scared to be ourselves, admit where we're at in our career, if we weren't so pressured by the internet to present an image of competence and success, then this never would have gotten to such dramatic proportions. An apology and accountability goes a long way, but if there wasn't such an image already in place, opposing the reality of Audra's product, there wouldn't have been such a problem in the first place. If you have any thoughts, feel free to leave them in the comments below. This was a very simplified version of the ongoing situation, so I would recommend checking out these videos too. I'll leave them in the description below. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.